else? I can't get up. And I am on. Okay, let's do our prayer before study. Christ, my Lord, the giver of light and wisdom, who opened the eyes of the blind man and transformed the fishermen into wise heralds and teachers of the gospel through the coming of the Holy Spirit, shine also in my mind the light of the grace of the Holy Spirit. Grant me discernment, understanding, and wisdom in learning. Enable me to complete my assignments and to abound in every good work, for to you I give honor and glory. Amen. Most blessed Lord, send the grace of your Holy Spirit on me to strengthen me, that I may learn well the subject I am about to study, and by it become a better person for your glory, the comfort of my family, and the benefit of your church and our nation. Amen. Okay, before we do anything, and while it's in my head, please get out your summary of Huckleberry Finn. I am not going to take it away from you because I want you to add to it, but I want to see that you did it. Oh, this looks good. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but I'm going to spot read. Oh, this is perfect length. Perfect length. So you're probably a little longer than you need to be, right? So I mean this. Yeah. See if this week if you can tighten it up. See if whatever you want to write one sentence less than you think you want to write. All right, I have to come around. Okay, beautiful, beautiful. Yeah. See, again, you included a lot of detail. No, that's not. This whole thing was one, but well done. Do you have yours? Okay. I will have to trust you. I do trust you.
I wrote mine on my phone, so I printed it out. I wasn't sure if you.
Oh, yeah, no. No. I'm not. I just want to know that you did it. Beautiful.
For mine, we didn't get the book until this weekend because we couldn't find it, so I didn't get to finish it.
Oh, no, that's fine. Yeah. That's fine. Wonderful. You probably are telling me more than you need to. If I tell you that, I'm going to yeah, beautiful.
Yeah, I'm probably telling people a lot more
Here,
than they
just
need to
pass.
know.
I'm sorry to be hovering over you. Here, look. Yeah, and it's okay. It's not bad to be thorough, but the idea of this. Yeah. So I don't have mine. I brought my Emma, but I might for the. Can you show me yours again? Like I felt like yours was really. No, you're all did different, and that's a good thing. Everybody's summary is going to be different because you're going to decide different things are important. But keep doing what you're doing. If I said, see if you can tighten it up, see if you can, when you want to write it, if I said it's like, it's quite a bit. If I said that to you, see if there's one detail you can leave out that you feel like you want to include, and ask yourself which detail would that be, right? Don't worry about like. You get caught up. We are going to read, just before we go on, we're going to read chapters 17 through 28. So we're heading to chapter 28 this week. I have something else I want you to do too, but I will talk about that at the end. Well done. Keep summarizing each chapter. Hopefully you will discover that you remember what you read better. You just remember it a little better. When you have to stop at the end and say, what happened? Oh, and then you have to put it in your own words, and this is a process too. So this is a really good tool to help you remember what you read. Okay, let us talk about Edgar Allan Poe. I have tons to say about Edgar Allan Poe. It's so cool. What did we say Edgar Allan Poe specializes in? What's his? Yeah, creepy. He specializes in creepy or detective stories, which aren't necessarily creepy, although usually there is some sort of crime committed, which may or may not be a creepy crime. And so we have another couple of specimens here on pages 141 and following. I'm simply going to read Annabel Lee, and you tell me what has happened. What is this about? It should not. Should not be a hard question to answer. It was many and many a year ago, in a kingdom by the sea, that a maiden there lived whom you may know by the name of Annabel Lee. And this maiden she lived with no other thought than to love and be loved by me. I was a child and she was a child in this kingdom by the sea, but we loved with a love that was more than love, I and my Annabel Lee, with a love that the winged seraphs of heaven coveted her and me. And this was the reason that long ago in this kingdom by the sea, a wind blew out of a cloud, chilling my beautiful Annabel Lee, so that her high-born kinsman came and bore her away from me, to shut her up in a sepulchre in this kingdom by the sea. The angels, not half so happy in heaven, went envying her and me. Yes, that was the reason, as all men know, in this kingdom by the sea, that the wind came out of the cloud by night, chilling and killing my Annabel Lee. But our love, it was stronger by far than the love of those who were older than we, of many far wiser than we. And neither the angels in heaven above nor the demons down under the sea can ever dissever my soul from the soul of the beautiful Annabel Lee. For the moon never beams without bringing me dreams of the beautiful Annabel Lee, and the stars never rise but I feel the bright eyes of my beautiful Annabel Lee. And so all the night tide I lie down by the side of my darling, my life and my bride, in her sepulchre there by the sea, in her tomb by the sounding sea. What has happened?
His wife died.
His wife has died. Why does he think she died?
Because she got, I guess, she was sickly, I guess.
Okay, that's answer number one is, it says a wind came chilling and killing my Annabel Lee. She became ill, presumably, in some fashion. Is there another reason, a deeper reason given, that Annabel Lee, heaven envied them? Both of these are true. Both of these are the right answer. She became ill, but the deeper reason, he says in the second stanza, the winged seraphs of heaven coveted her and me. That was the reason. And then fourth stanza, the angels not half so happy in heaven went envying her and me. That was the reason. Our love was so amazing that heaven was jealous. The angels were jealous, and they just came and took her. This is very depressing. What does he spend his time doing now? What does he seem to do? Maybe metaphorically, maybe literally, unclear. Thinking about her, definitely literally thinking about her. What does he do maybe?
I guess lays by like the deceased.
Yeah. All the night tide I lie down by the side of my darling, my life and my bride, in her sepulchre there by the sea, in her tomb by the sounding sea. Does he mean he does it in like metaphorically in his mind, or does he really go and sleep on the ground or in the mausoleum? Unclear. Unclear to me. Poe, as we mentioned last week, did lose a lot of people. His wife, who was his cousin Virginia Clem, died young. His mother died. He just lost a lot of people. And as we discussed at length last week, I think it was you people with the tuberculosis class. Did I give you the tuberculosis talk? I'm pretty sure I did. Which also was like a cough. The wind came chilling her. We have a lot of Poe poems about somebody's dead. Just have a lot of somebody's dead poems. However, the last one I gave you from Poe, and there are many, many, many more that we're not looking at, I really like it. It's a little different. So here, it's called Alone, so that might already clue you into maybe what it's about. But I would just like to ask you to tell me how does the author of this poem feel about his life, about the world? What is his prevailing feeling? From childhood's hour, I have not been as others were. I have not seen as others saw. I could not bring my passions from a common spring. From the same source, I have not taken my sorrow. I could not awaken my heart to joy at the same tone. And all I loved alone. Then, in my childhood, in the dawn of a most stormy life, was drawn from every depth of good or ill the mystery which binds me still. From the torrent or the fountain, from the red cliff of the mountain, from the sun that round me rolled in its autumn tint of gold, from the lightning in the sky as it passed me flying by, from the thunder and the storm and the cloud that took the form, when the rest of heaven was blue, of a demon in my view. How does he feel about himself and the world?
He kind of feels lonely and sad.
And why?
He's like different than everyone else.
He's different. And he's always been different. He says, from childhood's hour, I have not been as others were. I have not seen as others saw. I could not bring my passions from a common spring. The things that excite other people don't excite me. The things that upset other people don't upset me. It's different things. And all I loved alone. Now, maybe you sometimes feel this way, maybe not. You do not have to share. This is not the psychologist's class. But frequently, sometimes people feel like there's nobody else who likes this thing that I really like. Where are the other people like me? And we kind of have a cure for that now, I guess. What do we do if we really like something? How do we find other people who like the same things we like and are like us? What's an easy way to find those other people?
Cell phone comments or the media?
Yeah, through the internet somehow, Like, there's probably, for anything you might possibly, like, I really like four-leaf clovers. There's probably a four-leaf clover group, you know what I mean? And you can find them, and they probably have conventions and draw clovers and go hunting for them, whatever. There's probably people that do that. And so maybe now we don't have as many people who feel like, I am the only person on the face of the earth who sees the world like this. But imagine you could not find those other people. And you're the four-leaf clover devotee, and everybody thinks you're a little weird. Not that there's anything wrong with that. If you love four-leaf clovers, go for that. So he says he always has seen things differently. So at the end, first of all, what hint does he give us? What kind of life has he had? Has it been a good life or a hard life for him?
It's been hard.
What makes you think that, Gabriel?
The description in the middle, it's of a most stormy life was drawn from every depth.
Yes. In my childhood, in the dawn of a most stormy life. So it's been this way since childhood. In the dawn of a most stormy life. Life's been hard on me. Why do you think life has been hard on him? Why has it been a stormy life? Maybe. We don't know, but maybe.
Because he's different.
Because I'm different. The world is not very kind to people who are different. Hopefully your parents and your families are teaching you, I trust that you're learning. Just because somebody's different from you doesn't make them evil. There is evil, and there is sin. But just because somebody likes four-leaf clovers and you think that's stupid doesn't make them a stupid person, right? Hopefully you have a bigger mind than that as to judge. I've never understood stamp collecting, totally. I really apologize to any of you. I don't get it. But some people really do. And I'm fine with that. Just right? It doesn't make them less. But in general, the world is not very good to people. So I don't know how many of you watch Sesame Street. I grew up, Sesame Street started when I was 3 years old. So I was the target audience for Sesame Street when it first got launched, right? And I did my fair number of hours in front of Sesame Street. And Ernie and Bert, if you're familiar with Ernie and Bert, Ernie's kind of happy-go-lucky, and Bert's a little uptight, and he's a little odd. Bert's a little odd. And he has a bottle cap collection. Maybe you know this. Like they would talk about. And then he'd bring it out. It's like he wants to show Ernie. It's like, oh, I found this great bottle cap. And of course, the joke is that, Bert, nobody cares. It's a bottle cap. It's trash. But for him, it was wonderful. And the lovely thing was Ernie was a nice friend, right? And he tried to look at the bottle cap and everything. But, and it was obviously set up to make children feel better about themselves. If there's, if you're a little odd, maybe we're all a little odd. What does the ending mean? How do you interpret the ending? He says, the cloud and the cloud that took the form when the rest of heaven was blue of a demon in my view. Before that, he's naming all of nature. He sees all of nature differently, right? The sun and the autumn and the lightning and the thunder and the storm. And then he picks on this cloud at the end. What does he mean by that ending? What do we learn about him from the ending of that poem? It's kind of an abrupt ending.
It seems like even though he looks at everything, it's all like it ends up like even though heaven was blue, like this looks nice, he still sees a demon in it.
Yeah. You've all done it. It's one of those days where the sky is blue and the clouds are really fluffy. They're very tall and fluffy. And then that looks like a puppy. That one looks like a fish. That looks like a parrot. That one looks like a dinosaur, right? And you're probably saying, that one looks like a vampire. That one looks like, a werewolf is about to attack me. That one looks... And the author of this poem says, when the rest of heaven was blue, and we're all doing the game, which, hey, is not a new game. People have been doing this for probably millennia. The cloud that took the form of a demon, in my view, it's like, oh, I see a whale. I see a demon. And then everybody kind of moves their chair from him a little bit, leading maybe to the stormy life, because he's always felt alone. This poem resonates with me because I liked things that my peers didn't like very much. And I was sent to school, and so I was the oddity a little bit. Anyway, so I told you I had more to say about Poe. Please read these poems again at least one time. And if you really like Poe, all his poems aren't super long. You don't have to memorize The Raven if you're still on the lookout for a poem. I have had a student recite his poem for me yesterday, one of my students. I checked him off the list. You're all on the list, and I'm waiting. I have a complete works of Poe at home, but you can internet, like they're all public domain and you can find them. But here's what I wanted to talk about. Poe is not only the author of creepy stuff, but he's got mystery surrounding him in death and after death. Okay, so the first thing is, this is not mysterious. This is just a fact. Poe died at the age of 40. I'm going to tell you a little bit about the circumstances of his death, as far as we know, in a moment. But for some reason, the man who was put in charge of dealing with his estate and also writing his obituary was a guy named Griswold, who hated Poe. Okay, A, do not ask a guy who hates you to write your obituary. So he starts it, he says something like, oh, well, some of you may have heard about the death of Edgar Allan Poe. He was probably drank himself to death. He's a big, lousy drunk, and probably, if anybody's sorry, it will be, oh, we're sad because we don't know what he could have written if he had lived, because he really doesn't have any friends. Because his obituary starts. So a persona, a legend that Poe was always drunk started. I don't know. I pulled out my complete works of Poe for my students. It's like this thick, guys. Plus, that's not even his literary criticism. It's the complete poems and short stories. Can you be drunk all the time? I don't know, maybe. I don't know. But it seems like maybe not. I mean, he gave tours, speaking tours and everything. But this guy started this rumor. Okay, so here's the deal. Poe was living in one of the southern states, like Virginia maybe, and he was traveling to New England. And he disappears for a few days. And somebody finds him. He's in Baltimore, Maryland. And he's in an inn. He's like in the restaurant area of a hotel. And he's not okay. They can't tell what's wrong with him. He's not really making sense. So a doctor says he seems intoxicated. We don't know. Drugged? Wearing wrinkled, rumpled up clothes that didn't seem to fit him. Like they weren't his clothes. He has no idea where he's been. They take him to a hospital. He dies a couple days later. He never really comes out of it, except he keeps calling for somebody named Reynolds, and we have no idea who Reynolds is. He dies. And they bury him there in Baltimore. Nobody knows. What in the world happened to Poe? And where was he for the 2 or 3 days before? Nobody knows. What was he doing in Baltimore? He wasn't supposed to stop in. Nobody knows. So there are theories. One theory is, and this is horrifying, there was an election in Baltimore during that time period, and I guess it was a thing. It's got a name, but I can't remember what the name is. They would nab people and like drug them and force them to vote, and force them to vote multiple times at multiple polling places, and they would dress them up in other clothes, like and disguise them, and whatever the term is for doing that. Like press gang is if they make you go onto a ship, but there was a term for this. Some people somebody didn't know who he was. They just grabbed him. It's like, he's a body, he'll do. And they drugged him and drug him around and made him vote. And they gave him too much drug, whatever, to kill him. Nobody knows. I read that one guy, he was engaged to be married again, Poe. And she had brothers living near Baltimore. And apparently the brothers didn't like him very much. Didn't want their sister to marry him. This is the conspiracy theory. And that the brothers said, oh, will you stop in Baltimore so we can talk about a few things before the wedding, and that they like kidnapped him. And I don't know that he was beaten, you know, he just wasn't okay. He was obviously really, really bad off, and we don't know where he'd been. You know, he'd been outdoors, like exposed to the elements, we don't know. So to this day, no one knows what happened to Poe. So, a few years later, a lady writes a poem. I'm going to read this poem to you. 1864. This lady claims that the spirit of Poe came to her and dictated a poem. Nothing to say about that. But I'm going to read it to you, and you tell me, does it sound like Poe? And by the way, this lady, she claimed that other poets sometimes used her, you know, but she was not a trained poet. And she never, as far as I know, wrote anything on her own, you know. It just says she would proclaim poetry dictated to her by spirits, including that of Edgar Allan Poe. She was an inspirational and spiritual trance speaker. That is her job title. It's called The Streets of Baltimore. Here we go. Woman weak and woman mortal, through thy spirit's open portal, I would read the runic record of mine earthly being o'er. I would feel that fire returning which within my soul was burning, when my star was quenched in darkness, set to rise on earth no more, when I sank beneath life's burdens in the streets of Baltimore. Oh, those memories sore and saddening, oh, that night of anguish maddening, when my lone heart suffered shipwreck on a demon-haunted shore, when the fiends grew wild with laughter, and the silence following after was more awful and appalling than the cannon's deadly roar, than the tramp of mighty armies through the streets of Baltimore. Like a fiery serpent coiling, like a maelstrom madly boiling, did this phlegethon of fury sweep my shuddering spirit o'er. Rushing onward, blindly reeling, tortured by intensest feeling, like Prometheus when the vultures through his quivering vitals tore. Swift I fled from death and darkness through the streets of Baltimore. No one near to save or love me, no kind face to watch above me, though I heard the sound of footsteps like the waves upon the shore, beating, 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 now advancing, now retreating, with a dull and dreary rhythm, with a long continuous roar, heard the sound of human footsteps in the streets of Baltimore. There at length they found me lying, weak and wildered, sick and dying, and my shattered wreck of being to a kindly refuge bore. But my woe was past enduring, and my soul cast off its mooring, crying as I floated outward, I am of the earth no more. I have forfeited life's blessings in the streets of Baltimore. Where wast thou, O power eternal, when the fiery fiend infernal beat me with his burning fasces till I sank to rise no more? Oh, was all my lifelong error crowded in that night of terror? Did my sin find expiation which to judgment went before, summoned to a dread tribunal in the streets of Baltimore? Nay, with deep delirious pleasure I had drained my life's full measure, till the fatal fiery serpent fed upon my being's core. Then with force and fire volcanic, summoning a strength titanic, did I burst the bonds that bound me, battered down my being's door, fled, and left my shattered dwelling to the dust of Baltimore. Gazing back without lamenting, with no sorrowful repenting, I can read my life's sad story in a light unknown before. For there is no woe so dismal, not an evil so abysmal, but a rainbow arch of glory spans the yawning chasm o'er, and across that bridge of beauty did I pass from Baltimore. In that grand eternal city where the angel hearts take pity on the sin which men forgive not or inactively deplore. Earth has lost the power to harm me, death can never more alarm me, and I drink fresh inspiration from the source which I adore, through my spirit's apotheosis, that new birth in Baltimore. Now no longer sadly yearning, love for love finds sweet returning, and there comes no ghostly raven tapping at my chamber door. Calmly in the golden glory I can sit and read life's story, from my soul from out that shadow hath been lifted evermore, from that deep and dismal shadow in the streets of Baltimore. This random spirit lady wrote this poem. Nothing, doesn't it really sound like the raven? It really sounds like Poe. Now, either she's well, I'm not suggesting that Poe possessed her, and I don't really believe that happened. But she's a really good poet, or something weird's going on there. That's all I have to say. Okay, so I'm not even done yet. In the 1930s, on Poe's birthday, somebody came and left 3 roses and a bottle of cognac on his grave. And it's like brandy, like a liquor. They drank a glass and left the remainder of the bottle and 3 roses. And it happened every year for decades. People would, always on his birthday. So they would watch, people would gather, but nobody ever stopped the person. Somebody with a hat and a cloak would come, drink it, and leave 3 roses and leave. And nobody, everybody was kind of freaked out. It's like, what? Nobody stopped him. Anyway, this happened till the late 70s. And then one year there was the bottle and the roses and a note, and it said that the original person had died and passed the torch on to the son. And so for a while, it kept happening. But then as it went into the 80s, like it happened, there were years it didn't happen. And then eventually it just stopped. Nobody has any idea why somebody for 40 years came and drank to Poe's memory and left the rest of the bottle and 3 roses on his tombstone. I'm not making I couldn't make this up. I'm not good enough to make any of this up. I'm very boring. I would never make this up. No, and no one stopped him and said, dude, what? And I guess it's because they were kind of in awe. Like, what? There's a deep meaning here. Is this a relative? Is this nobody knows. Yes.
It could be that guy that he mentioned when he was like,
Reynolds. Except that, but by the time this started, like he died in 1940s or 1840 something. So the guy would have been like 100 years old. But anyway, sorry, thank you. That is my story about Poe. Yes. Do you have something else?
maybe could have been like the child of Reynolds.
Maybe. I mean, we're never going to know. It's history. The world is full of these intriguing, like we have no idea. And I just want to know so much. But I don't know.
Curious what happens going on.
Curious. So you can Google it. I mean, don't trust everything you Google. But in general, they'll probably tell you, like some stories it says it's cognac or brandy or, like it gets told differently. But anyway. All right, before we spend the rest of our time talking about Huckleberry Finn, I want to mention something else about next week's reading. You have no writing assignment for next week. But I do have an extra assignment for you. And it is this. In your reading guide, in addition to summarizing Huckleberry Finn, in your reading guide on page 143, and the pages following, there are 2 speeches by Abraham Lincoln. The first one is his first inaugural address. So I'm sure you are aware, when a president is sworn into office, he makes a speech, his inaugural address. So this was Lincoln's, and Lincoln had 2, right, because he was elected twice. So this is his first one, and I just want to remind you of the circumstances. Remember, a large portion of the country has said, if they elect that man president, we are out of here. We are seceding from the United States of America, and we're going to form our own government. And Lincoln had tried very hard when he was campaigning to say, there's really no need for that. I don't intend to do anything to your states. Chill. That is not a quote from Lincoln. But and he was elected, and as you guys are fully aware, those states did secede. This first speech is his plea that those people not worry about the fact that he's been elected. Okay? And so if you read that, and then on page 149, there are questions. I have questions. Lincoln's first inaugural speech. I want you to read the speech, and I want you to answer the questions. Then if you turn the page, it's extremely short. I bet you have read it many times before. It is the Gettysburg Address. And there are also some questions. Just to remind you, Gettysburg was the site of a very long, a 3-day, horrible, brutal battle between the North and the South. And they had a memorial service there to honor the dead. And the first guy got up and he talked for like 3 hours because he was the renowned orator, Edward Everett. And then Lincoln got up and said this. You can read it out loud and time yourself. It doesn't take very long. I want you to read them and answer the questions, but I want you to do one other thing for me. I want you, because it's in your reading guide. You can write all over it. You can use pens, you can use highlighters. It's your reading guide. I want you to look for places where Lincoln appealed to logos, should be very familiar to you, where he reasoned with them. Look at reason 1, 2, 3, 4. look, I said this, and why are you not trusting me? Which actually would go into the next one. Ethos. Have I been untrustworthy? Do I not have a reputation for being trustworthy? Or pathos. He is stirring their emotions. He wants to work their emotions over. You can just label them L, E, or P in the margin. You don't have to label every sentence. Don't analyze please don't. But when something jumps out at you and you think, wow, he is point by point reasoning with them, mark it. When he seems to be saying something that sounds like he wants to make himself trustworthy, and mark it. And when he uses words that are just calculated to stir your heart, or mentions things that are obviously going to make you feel strong emotions, or do make you feel strong emotions while you read it, mark it, okay? Do that for me. And come ready to share places where you found these things. All right? Is that it? That's it. I don't need no paper or anything. Just summarize Huckleberry Finn. We're reading chapters, what did I say? Through 28. 17 through 28. And read those 2 speeches and just note so that you'll remember later and you can talk about it. So if next week when I say, where did you find Lincoln appearing to Logos? You have an answer. It's like right here because I marked it on the page. Okay? That's it. That's our assignment for next week. Okay, let us take a look at Huckleberry Finn. There may be some spoilers sorry. I don't know if you notice this, because often when I open a book, I just, table of contents, blah, 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 okay, introduction, whatever. Where's chapter 1? But if you don't blow through, you find a notice at the beginning of Huckleberry Finn. And here's what it says. Persons attempting to find a motive in this narrative will be prosecuted. Persons attempting to find a moral in it will be banished. Persons attempting to find a plot in it will be shot by order of the author. And I don't know who GG, Chief of Ordnance, is. Mark Twain tells us before we read anything, don't try to find any motives, morals, or even a plot in this book. Why in the world would he say that to us? What is he trying? What?
Stop people from trying to find deep meaning, just a story.
Okay, first of all, Mark Twain is saying we're not in Aesop's fables here. You shouldn't be greedy. You shouldn't be boastful. You should, whatever. You should, I'm trying to think of morals for me. Slow and steady wins the race, or whatever. Be like the ant, don't be like the grasshopper. He says, I'm not teaching you a lesson. However, he also says, you're not going to find a plot in this book. Do you feel like you've already found a plot?
Yeah.
This is not a plotless book. Huck is running away because his dad beats him and locks him in that cabin for days at a time and tried to kill him with a knife. Any one of those is a good reason probably to get out. And then Jim is going to be sold down the river and he is running. This sounds like a plot. So when Mark Twain says, don't bother to find a plot, but then gives me a plot, but then he says, don't bother to find a moral. What am I supposed to think?
The story's more like a tale rather than something with heavy plot. It's just like
Okay.
It's like what a life experience kind of.
Okay.
Like.
But is it just a stream of consciousness? Like, is it just like is it just everything that passes through Huck's brain all muddled together? Or does it have a sequence of events? It has a sequence of events. I know what you mean. And it is rather, we refer to something like this as being episodic, like an episode of a TV show, right? So, not so far. But you're about to get into a portion of the book. Some of you maybe have read the book before, so you know what I mean. Where it's just like this happens for a while, and then this happens for a while, and then this happens for a while, and then this happens for a while, and it keeps changing. So it seems episodic. In that case, Dominic is absolutely right. It's a series of tales. But there is an overarching Huck's on the run, Jim's on the run. I don't know. I just wonder if we should ask ourselves. We can't answer yet because we haven't read the whole book. But when Mark Twain says there's no plot in this book, but we kind of, well, yeah, there sort of is. But when he says there's no lessons to be learned from this book, is he being straight with us or is he not being straight with us? We don't know yet. But let's just can we tuck that away? Put that in the back of our minds as we read. And just think, okay. Also, Mark Twain is being funny. But back to what Dominic first said, though. There had been a series, there have been, but in Mark Twain's time, a lot of them, stories with a really heavy-handed moral, we would say. It's like beat you over the head with the obvious moral of this story. It's so painfully obvious they wrote this story to teach you a lesson. And maybe this is his shout out against that. Like, no. We're going to have a good time. Can you have a good time and learn something at the same time?
Yeah.
You could. So it remains to be seen whether we will learn something or whether we'll just have a good time. Yes.
One more, like,
Yes, please.
maybe he's trying to like point out to people that this isn't like a story like super deep. It's just a story to enjoy rather than like mull over.
Yeah. You know, the problem with a class like this, or the problem with reading, is sometimes we feel obligated to, I've got to find the deeper themes and whatever. Can we just read it and really enjoy it? Can I just read Annabelle Lee? It's like, okay, obviously she's dead. He may or may not go down to the graveyard and sleep there. Unclear, but I just like the way it sounds. Awesome. You know what I mean? I don't have to learn something from it. And this kind of goes against the grain. We feel like, we've got to make good use of everything we read, but sometimes something is just beautiful, or it's just funny. It's okay. All right. So, how many of you, I know I asked you this last week, but I'm asking again, how many of you have read Tom Sawyer? Those of you who have, and it's fine if you haven't, those of you who have, do you remember who is talking in Tom Sawyer? In other words, does anybody remember if Tom himself is talking, or if there's a narrator who says, Tom does this, and Becky Thatcher does that, and Huck does this, and Injun Joe does that? Does anybody remember?
There's a narrator. Yeah, there is.
There's a narrator.
There's this, Tom Sawyer, Huck, and Joe Harper did this.
Yes. And then they went to the graveyard with the cat, the dead cat and whatever, and get rid of the warts or whatever. Okay. And now those of you who haven't read it, it's like, I'm going to read this book. Yes, you do. There's what we call a third-person narrator in Tom Sawyer, right? Somebody outside of the action, like God. Like the God of the story saying, and he did that, and they know everything's going. What about this book? Huck's talking. He's talking straight to us. It's a first-person narrator. And here's how it starts. I'm going to read the very beginning. You don't know about me. Thought you've read a book by the name of The Adventures of Tom Sawyer, but that ain't no matter. That book was made by Mr. Mark Twain, and he told the truth mainly. There was things which he stretched, but mainly he told the truth. That's nothing. I never seen anybody but lied one time or another without it was Aunt Polly or the widow or maybe Mary. Aunt Polly, Tom's Aunt Polly, she is, and Mary and the widow Douglas is all told about in that book, which is mostly a true book with some stretchers, as I said before. He starts out and he says, well, I was in this book, Tom Sawyer, and it is mainly true. He mainly told the truth. There's some stretchers, but he mainly told the truth. And he starts the book. He tells us numerous times. And he says, everybody lies. Except maybe the widow Douglas and Aunt Pa.
It's kind of funny that.
So, Huck, is this mainly true? Are you telling me some stretchers? Like what? How am I supposed to take that? The narrator just told me, everybody lies. And there's a story about me in another book, and it was mainly true. There's some stretches, but it's mainly true. But everybody lies. So, and he reminds us of it again. And do I trust him? Is he telling me the truth? What were you going to say?
I was just saying it's funny that like how Mark Twain says like, oh, there were some stretches in the Tom Sawyer book, but he wrote it himself. It's
Yes.
Like, I stretch myself.
Yes.
I guess that's why he says don't look for a plot because it could possibly kill him.
This isn't even true.
Lying about his own
I don't
story.
even trust Huck now. I don't even know. Now, does Huck ever, in the portion you've read, does Huck say anything that puts himself in not such a good light? Does he do anything, or does anything happen that makes Huck look a little bit maybe not so great? Can you think of an example?
Well, like for himself, like he personally thinks that he's doing bad and helping Jim.
Okay.
When, like, he puts himself in a bad light, like people who.
Yeah. Towards the end, and we're going to visit that again in a few minutes. He's eaten up with worry that he's doing the wrong thing. So this reminds me, we skipped over this. I had you read 2 excerpts. One was from Mark Twain himself, from Life on the Mississippi. And just to jog your memory, does anybody remember basically what happens to a river town when the steamboat comes in?
Everyone's like excited about it.
Woo! Everybody suddenly, it's like the town drunk wakes up, and everybody runs down. It's like, oh, what is it? And why? Because nothing really happens otherwise. It's very boring, and you don't know what might be on the boat. Maybe you mail ordered something and it's been shipped to you. Maybe it's visitors. Maybe it's strangers who have news from other places, because I'm not getting a lot of news from other places, So those of you who are familiar with The Music Man, the musical The Music Man, the Wells Fargo wagon, this is the same situation. In that song, everybody's like, oh, maybe it's the thing I ordered from Sears. Maybe it's my new material. Maybe it's my new dress. Maybe it's the new, And this is what it was like. So picture St. Petersburg. Picture this environment like that, okay? Most of the time, there's not much going on till the steamboat comes in, which is why young Samuel Clemens, Mark Twain, wanted to be a steamboat captain, because you're awesome. And everybody's like, hey, here comes the steamboat. The other thing I had you read was about the Fugitive Slave Act. And so to remind you, we find out, this was in Boston, there was a slave who escaped from slavery and fled to Boston, but they had passed a law that it was illegal not to capture and return a runaway slave to his owners. And so in the portion that I had you read, this was happening in Boston. They found him. And does anybody remember the reaction of the people in Boston?
They were trying to bust him out of jail.
Yeah, they were, say it again?
Rioted.
Yeah, they were rioting, but trying to bust him out of jail. He said there was a judge who, like, one guy draped his windows in mourning, which means, back once upon a time when someone in the household died, you would drape like black curtains and things, and it would show, oh, they're in mourning. He draped it in mourning for this guy. And then there was a judge who apparently hoisted a coffin, and it said, the death of liberty, on the side of the coffin. And people were, one guy flew a flag, like not upside down, but, shifted it for mourning. And it was like, we're going to rip that flag down. It was like, I'd like to see you try. And yes, they were rioting because so many people thought, this is wrong. This man shouldn't be a slave to begin with. And if he was, he has escaped to a place. We don't have slaves in Boston. Let him go. So this is the problem in Huck Finn, right? This is illegal. If you know of a fugitive slave and you harbor them and don't turn them in, you're breaking the law. Okay, so let's come back around to that in a minute. So this is the place where Huck puts himself in a bad light. I'm doing a bad thing, he says. Do you remember when he he touches the snake skin, and then Jim says, ooh, it's bad luck. And then he finds the rattlesnake and he kills it, but he coils it up to freak Jim out. But inadvertently, the mate of the snake comes and he gets bit by a rattlesnake. He never tells Jim. But he does tell us, you know, I did that and I felt pretty bad, but I wasn't going to let Jim find out if I could help it. He said, but I knew I wasn't going to touch any more snake skins. It was right. Jim was right. So he tells us, my favorite one I will read about in a minute. So he does tell us enough to make us know that he is revealing negative things about himself. But other than that, it's unclear how much we trust Huck. Okay, let us talk about the widow Douglas and Miss Watson. So the widow Douglas has taken him in, right? And page 18. See, it doesn't do me any good to write down page numbers if I don't look at my notes. Okay. The widow Douglas has taken him in at the end of Tom Sawyer. Just to remind you, there was talk of money. Tom and Huck found money at the end of Tom Sawyer, and Judge Thatcher takes care of it for them and invests it for them and just doles it out as they go. And so Huck you saw what happened to him. You saw what his dad is like. He's basically homeless and orphaned, except not orphaned, because it's like worse than orphaned, because his dad actively pursues him and beats him when he's not drunk, when he is drunk, too. So Widow Douglas took him in. And Miss Watson is the Widow Douglas's sister. How are these ladies different? How are their views of God different? What is Miss Watson like, and what is Widow Douglas like?
Is some of them like about like prayer and stuff like that?
They both want him to pray. How is their praying different from each other? Do you remember?
I think one prays in the closet or something like that.
Well, yeah.
There's a difference, like, you meant differences in, like, one is, like, all about providence, and the other is, like, you pray for it, you can get it.
Yeah. Well, let me read this, because it's not fair. Just, like, throw a question out. I had to read 100 pages, and it's like, tell me about this. Okay. Okay. This was after he snuck out, because they're going to be pirates, and kill people and steal stuff, except they never do it. Well, I got a good going over in the morning from old Miss Watson on account of my clothes. But the widow, she didn't scold, but only cleaned off the grease and clay and looked so sorry that I thought I would behave well if I could. Then Miss Watson, she took me in the closet and prayed, but nothing come of it. She told me to pray every day, and whatever I asked for, I'd get it. But it weren't so. I tried it. Once I got a fish line, but no hooks. It weren't any good to me without hooks. I tried for the hooks 3 or 4 times, but somehow I couldn't make it work. By and by, one day, I asked Miss Watson to try for me, but she said I was a fool. She never told me why. And I couldn't make it out no way. I sat down one time back in the woods and had a long think about it. I says to myself, if a body can get anything they pray for, why don't Deacon Wynn get back the money he lost on pork? Why can't the widow get back her silver snuff box that was stole? Why can't Miss Watson fat up? No, says I to myself, there ain't nothing in it. I went and told the widow about it. And she said the thing a body could get by praying for it was spiritual gifts. This was too many for me. But she told me what she meant. I must help other people and do everything I could for other people and look out for them all the time and never think about myself. This was including Miss Watson, as I took it. I went out in the woods and turned it over in my mind a long time, but I couldn't see no advantage about it, except for the other people. So at last I reckoned I wouldn't worry about it anymore, but just let it go. Sometimes the widow would take me one side and talk about providence in a way to make a body's mouth water. But maybe next day Miss Watson would take hold and knock it all down again. I judged I could see there was 2 providences, and a poor chap might stand considerable show with the widow's providence. But if Miss Watson's got him, there weren't no help for him anymore. I thought it all out, and I reckoned I would belong to the widow's if he wanted me, though couldn't make out how he was going to be any better off than what he was before, seeing I was so ignorant and so kind of low down and ornery. There's two providences, he said. If the widow Douglas's providence got hold of you, you might stand a chance. There weren't no help for you, Miss Watson's. What does he mean by that? What are their views of God?
Like one's merciful and one's more punished.
Yeah. Miss Watson's God is, God's going to get you for that. There's one, I didn't mark it. Remember the time? She was going on and on and on. She said something about hell. And he said, I told her I wished I was there. And then she lit into me again. He said, I didn't mean nothing by it. I just wished I was somewhere else. I just didn't want to be here listening to her. And so she, do you notice how Miss Watson never asks him, okay, so he says, well, I got it fishing and I tried to pray for the hooks, but God didn't give me the hooks. The line's no good without the hooks. And she said I was a fool. But she doesn't explain what she means. You can't say to a child, you will get anything if you pray for it, and then expect them to understand what you mean. But you don't mean that. Even Jesus prayed for something he didn't get, that the cup would pass from him. So it doesn't work that way. The widow Douglas is like, no, it's spiritual, and you need to be good to other people. And he says, I love that line. Sometimes she would talk about providence to make a person's mouth water. It's like, oh, I want that God. He says, well, I reckon I'll belong to her providence if he wants me, but I don't think he'll be any better off if he gets me. Yeah, Miss Watson is... Do you like Miss Watson?
Not
Do we like...
really, no.
No, we don't. She's really not very nice. And she's a major plot point, isn't she? Because I mentioned this before. What does she want to do that makes Jim run away?
She wants to sell him.
Sell him. And sell him where?
Isn't it like New Orleans?
What does that mean for a slave? Why is that different than just selling him to a neighbor? Does anybody know?
It's worse down there, further down south.
The further south you go, the worse it is because it's cotton plantations. So in Missouri, St. Petersburg is in Missouri because Hannibal's in Missouri and Mark Twain's from there. Jim, okay, so at the beginning, you remember how they sneak up on Jim, and Jim has a hairball that tells the future, and then they, take his hat, and he collects money, like showing people his coin and talking about how witches rode him all over. Does it sound like Jim has a terrible, hard life? No. Now, I realize he's a slave and not allowed to leave. Believe me, I understand. But what I'm saying is he beaten all the time? Is he kept up all? No. Apparently he spends a lot of time lounging around, talking to the other slaves. All right. Please, do not get me wrong. Don't go home and say Mrs. Ferguson says slavery is fine. I'm saying that in the northern edge of slavery, it's more like household servants, like your butler and your cook and your whatever. But as you work your way south, as you work your way down the river, there's a higher likelihood that your gig is going to be out picking cotton in the fields from sunup to sundown until it just wears you out and you die of it. And because there's so much opportunity for them to run away because they're out in the fields, they're more likely to be chained. They're more likely to be overseers that will beat you if you're not picking fast enough. You see what I mean? So to say, she's going to sell me down the river is code for life's going to get really bad really fast. Not to mention, there was something else nearby that Jim might not want to leave. What was that?
His wife.
Yeah, he's got a wife and a family. His wife does not belong to Miss Watson, but she belongs to a nearby family, so they can see each other, on a semi-regular basis. He'll never see them again. If he gets sold down the river, he'll never see them again. So that's Miss Watson, right? We don't, like Mark Twain doesn't sit down, Huck doesn't sit down and say, let me tell you about Miss Watson, but we get clues. She's always nagging on Huck. Huck goes out, because boys will be boys, as they say, and he's climbing around in a cave, and he gets his clothes all dirty, and Miss Watson just gives him what for, and the widow Douglas is like, oh, that choice makes me sad, Huck, right? She just cleans the clothes off a little bit. Really wish you wouldn't do that, But Miss Watson's just chews him out. So we know what she's like, even though we're not told. And then when we find out she is willing to sell Jim down to New Orleans, knowing what that's going to mean and knowing he has family nearby, that's Miss Watson. Widow Douglas is another case. But does Huck like either one of them particularly? Does Huck just love the Widow Douglas and would never want to leave the Widow Douglas?
He says she's not kind to him in her own way,
Yeah.
the way she thinks it's best, but he doesn't like it.
And what does he not like particularly?
He kind of feels like confined.
Does he have a pretty good life there?
He does.
Oh yeah. He's got plenty of food. He's got a good place to sleep. He's got clean clothes. Yes, he gets a salary from Judge Thatcher. He gets like $1 a day. I mean, it's good money. Everything's going well, but he's like, oh, I don't like sleeping in that bed. I'm just not used to it. I'm used to sleeping in barrels and and ditches and wherever, because this is the way he's grown up. And these clothes itch, and I don't want to have to go to school. Really? So he doesn't love it. We'll run into this fact about Huck again, that he doesn't love all the niceties of civilized life. Does Huck know right from wrong?
As long as you return it at some point in your life.
What? Yes, okay. So let's look onto that. I did mark this, because it's hilarious. Every night now, I used to slip ashore towards 10 o'clock at some little village and buy 10 or 15 cents worth of meal or bacon or other stuff to eat. And sometimes I lifted a chicken that weren't roosting comfortable and took him along. Pap always said, take a chicken when you get a chance, because if you don't want him yourself, you can easily find someone else that does. And a good deed I never forgot. I never see Pap when he didn't want the chicken himself, but that's what he used to say anyway. Mornings before daylight, I slipped into cornfields and borrowed a watermelon or a mushmelon or a pumpkin or some new corn or things of that kind. Pap always said it weren't no harm to borrow things if you was meaning to pay 'em back, but the widow said it weren't anything but a soft name for stealing, and no decent body would do it. Jim said he reckoned the widow was partly right and Pap was partly right, so the best way would be for us to pick out 2 or 3 things from the list and say we wouldn't borrow them anymore. Then he reckoned it wouldn't be no harm to borrow the others. So we talked it over all one night, drifting along down the river, trying to make up our minds whether to drop the watermelons or the cantaloupes or the mushmelons or what. But towards daylight, we got it all settled satisfactory and concluded to drop crab apples and persimmons. We weren't feeling right before that, but it was all comfortable now. I was glad the way it came out, too, because crab apples ain't ever good. And persimmons wouldn't be ripe for 2 or 3 months. Isn't that lovely the way it turned out? Let's not borrow the things that are gross, and let's only borrow the things that are good. So, Huck tells us this. The widow Douglas says it's just stealing. Pap says it's just borrowing. Maybe we could split the difference and we could borrow some things, but not others. Now, does Mark Twain, listen, not Huck, does Mark Twain know that's a joke I mean, is that
Yeah.
intentionally? Okay, yeah.
It sounds like a joke.
Does Huck know? Like, and this, we're not sure. Does Huck know that they made it happen that way? They intentionally chose the things that they don't really want not to borrow. Does he know that they kind of cheated on that, or does he not know?
It seems like he doesn't know.
Kind of seems like he's like, I love the way it turned out. Because crab apples ain't ever good. Persimmons. Might not. Persimmons, we're a little far north for persimmons. I make a Christmas dessert with persimmons. They're not really good till it frosts. Persimmons are a fruit that you want to get them after a good freeze or a frost, because before then they're really bitter. So we don't know. Does he know right from wrong? He certainly sounds like he's a little iffy. Would we be surprised if he didn't know right from wrong very well? Why not?
Because he hasn't really had like a super good influence for it.
He's not been taught well at all. Which leads us to a couple of things he does. First of all, I want to talk about this. This is my favorite part of the whole book. Okay, my second favorite part comes up in the next reading. Okay. They are headed down the river, and you might remember that they get separated in the fog. They're trying to tie up at a towhead, right, the end of an island. And he's got the canoe, but the current comes by and sweeps him out and sweeps the rope away that's attached to the raft, and he's set adrift, and Jim's on the raft adrift, and they yell to each other. You remember this story all night? And he figures out that one of them's gone around the island one way and one's gone the other. And of course, you don't know. You yell out and somebody might yell, but it might be a riverboatman. You don't know that it's Jim or Huck. So finally, he finds him the next morning. Jim's asleep. And the raft is covered in debris from branches and, where they've brushed up against the trees hanging out over the island. And he climbs up on the raft. And do you remember what Huck pretends?
Oh yeah, he was having a dream.
Yeah, he pretends it was all a dream. That never. Jim's, Huck, he's back. He's like, what do you mean, Jim? Where have I been? He's like, weren't you lost in the fog? Oh, I don't know, Jim, that must have been quite a dream. So Jim goes on and on and on, and he says, well, the towhead represented this, and the fog was a symbol of that, and everything, and the rope represents this, and the calling in the night represents that. And then there's this. Well, that's all interpreted well enough as far as it goes, Jim, I says. But what does these things stand for? It was the leaves and rubbish on the raft and the smashed oar. You could see him first rate now. Jim looked at the trash and then looked at me and back at the trash again. He had got the dream fixed so strong in his head that he couldn't seem to shake it loose and get the facts back into its place again right away. But when he did get the thing straightened out, he looked at me steady without ever smiling and says, what did they stand for? I was going to tell you. When I got all wore out with work and went to calling for you and went to sleep, my heart was most broke because you was lost, and I didn't care no more what become of me and a raft. And when I wake up and find you back again all safe and sound, the tears come, and I could have got down on my knees and kissed your foot. I was so thankful. And all you was thinking about was how you could make a fool of old Jim with a lie. That truck there is trash. And trash is what people is that puts dirt on the head and the friend's head and makes them ashamed. Then he got up slow and walked to the wigwam and went in there without saying anything but that. But that was enough. It made me feel so mean I could almost kiss his foot to get him to take it back. Does Huck realize he did a wrong thing? Oh my gosh. And who taught him? Jim. So here's the question. Is Jim educated? No. Jim doesn't know much about anything. Jim's, he has all these weird superstitions.
Like hairballs are magic.
Like the hairballs are magic, and the witches ride him around, and he, as far as we know, he doesn't know how to write, he doesn't know how to read, he doesn't know much of anything. Is Jim intelligent? Think about the thing I just read. Huck, I'll tell you what that is. My heart broke. My heart broke because I thought you was lost. And I was overjoyed when you were back. And all you could do was think how you could make a fool out of me. That's trash. And trash is people that do that to their friends. And he just leaves. Burn. He really is. Now, he thinks some odd things, but remember, he gets the plan. What are we going to do? Go down the river to Cairo. Do y'all know? Cairo is at the tip of Illinois, right? Cairo. So this is one of my air maps. I'll have to do it on the right side for you guys. Okay, here's the Mississippi, and here's Illinois, right? And then here's Cairo. And the tip of Illinois is formed by the fact that the Ohio River feeds into the Mississippi right there. And so the idea is you go down to Cairo, and then you watch for the Ohio River, and if you head up the Ohio River, you're headed towards Free State. Because in the Ohio River, you have Ohio, you have Kentucky. Kentucky's a slave state, but Ohio's free state. But the farther you get, but you could go in Ohio, but if you get farther up, and when you're going towards free states. Anyway, that's his plan. Head down the river, hit Cairo, up the Ohio River. This is not an unintelligent plan, unfortunately. Apparently they missed Cairo in the fog. And now they're just headed straight to the place where he didn't want to get sold to, which is not good. But yeah, he's intelligent. Does Jim seem like, what do I say? Is he good? Is he kind?
Yeah,
Does he care about Huck?
he does.
He really cares about Huck. Do you think he only cares about Huck because he's using Huck to get away?
No.
I don't get that impression at all either. So this takes us back around. I said we were going to circle back around to what Neil mentioned. When we said, does he know right from wrong? We said he feels bad because he's helping a slave escape. He's stealing somebody's slave. He's stealing Miss Watson's slave, he says. And I'm going to read a couple of passages here. I can tell you it made me all over trembly and feverish, too, to hear him, because I begun to get it through my head that he was most free. And who was to blame for it? Well, me. I couldn't get that out of my conscience. No how, no way. It got to troubling me so I couldn't rest. I couldn't stay still in one place. It had never come home to me before what this thing was that I was doing. But now it did, and it stayed with me and scorched me more and more. I tried to make out myself that I weren't to blame because I didn't run Jim off from his owner. But it weren't no use. Conscience up and says every time, but you knowed he was running for his freedom, and you could have paddled ashore and told somebody. So he says, so I've decided I'm going to do that. I'm going to paddle ashore. And of course, he does. He gets ready. He's like, okay, I'm going to go over there. I'm going to turn him in. And Jim's talking about it, and he's saying how I'm going to go to Free State. I'm going to have enough money to buy my wife, and I'm going to get my kids. And if I can't buy my kids, I'm going to have somebody go in and steal them. Huck says, it most froze me to hear such talk. He wouldn't have dared to talk such talk in his life before. He's going to steal his kids. So I was sorry to hear Jim say that. It was such a lowering of him that he would steal his own children. My conscience got to stirring me up hotter than ever until at last I says to it, let up on me. It ain't too late yet. I'll paddle ashore at the first light and I'll tell. I felt easy and happy and light as a feather right off. All my troubles was gone. I went to looking out sharp for a light, sort of singing to myself. By and by, one shows, and Jim sings out, "We safe, Huck, we safe. Jump up and crack your heels. That's the good old Cairo at last. I just knows it." I says, "I'll take the canoe and go see, Jim. It mightn't be, you know." He jumped up and got the canoe ready and put his old coat in the bottom for me to set on and give me the paddle. And as I shoved off, he says, "Pretty soon I'll be a-shouting for joy, and I'll say, 'It's all on accounts of Huck. I's a free man, and I couldn't ever been free if it hadn't been for Huck. Huck done it. Jim will never forget you, Huck. You's been the best friend Jim's ever had, and you's the only friend Jim's got now.'" I was paddling off, all in a sweat to tell on him, but when he says this, it seemed to kind of take the tuck all out of me. I went along slow then, and I weren't right down certain whether I was glad I started or whether I weren't. So he meets up with somebody, and as you might recall, he ends up making them believe there's smallpox on the raft, so they won't go check it out. And Jim hears the whole thing. Because they were, "Oh, is a runaway slave on that raft?" "Perhaps on the raft." "Oh, yeah, you should go check, because nobody else will help us." "Why, is somebody sick?" Well, it's just a..." So he leads him to believe. Smallpox. Okay. They went off, and I got aboard the raft feeling bad and low, because I knowed very well I'd done wrong. And I see it weren't no use for me to try to learn to do right. A body that don't get started right when he's little ain't got no show. When the pinch comes, there ain't nothing to back him up and to keep him to his work, so he gets beat. Then I thought a minute and says to myself, "Hold on. Suppose you'd have done right and give Jim up. Would you feel better than what you do now?" "No," says I. "I'd feel bad. I'd feel just the same way I do now." "Well then," says I, "what's the use of you learning to do right when it's troublesome to do right and it ain't no trouble to do wrong, and the wages is just the same?" I was stuck. Couldn't answer that. So I reckoned I wouldn't bother no more about it, but after this I always do whichever came handiest at the time. So, does Huck believe he's doing the wrong thing? I'm not turning Huck in, and that's wrong. It's illegal. It's wrong. I'm helping steal someone's property. What does the reader of the book think? What do you think Mark Twain wants us to think? Do you think he wants us to think that Huck is definitely doing something wrong? Or does he want us to think that Huck is inadvertently making the right decision even though he thinks it's the wrong one?
Huck is inadvertently making the right decision.
Huck thinks he's just the worst person on earth because he's stealing somebody's slave and helping him to run away. But the joke is he's doing the right thing. Because remember, Mark Twain is writing this long after the Civil War is over, 20 years after the Civil War is over. And there's no evidence that Mark Twain was ever a big fan of slavery to begin with, right? Even though he grew up around it. So yeah, we always have to kind of ask ourselves, what does Huck think? Is Huck telling us the truth about it? But what does Mark Twain want us to think about this? It's not always the same answer. Tell me a little bit what life on the raft is like. How do they spend their days? What's it like on the raft?
They just sit there, talk and laugh, fish, swim.
Does it sound like a pretty good life?
For them, yeah.
It sounds all right. Let's just get on a raft and float down the Mississippi. Awesome. At night they sneak over and borrow things, maybe. A few things. Now, tell me, okay, I guess this doesn't count when they were on the island because they're not on the raft yet. So let's just limit it to when they're on the raft. Tell me a time when they leave the raft to go do something. They get off the raft.
The wrecked boat.
The wrecked boat. Okay. So, because we have the benefit of living on the Mississippi River, we know that there are shallow places and there are little tiny islands and there's bigger islands and there's places where rocks stick up. And so you know, it would be easy for a boat pilot to, if they don't know the river really, really well, to get in the shallows or wreck on a rock. And this boat got stuck. What's going to happen to that boat eventually? It's going to sink. Because it's up against a rock, the rock is digging or making a hole, and eventually the current is going to sweep past enough, or there's going to be waves coming past as other boats come past. It's going to get off the rock and it's going to sink because it's got a hole in it, right? So, is it a good plan to get onto the boat?
No.
Whose plan was it? Which Huck's? What did Jim want to do?
Jim didn't want to do anything about it. He's just like, "Let's
This is another intelligent moment. Jim's like, really? Really? You're going to get, this is going to get washed away and everybody else is going to drown. I was like, yeah, let's do it. Tom Sawyer would do it. But Jim does it because he's so nice. He's like, okay. And I can't let Heck do it by himself, right? So, and does it end well or poorly?
It actually ends well.
It actually ends well for them. Does it end so well for the guys who were the shifty guys? Apparently not. What does Huck try to do for them?
He tries getting them help.
He tries to go and report that there's people on the wrecked ship, even though he says it's his family. Do you notice how fast Huck makes up lies? He's really pretty good, except he can't remember if his name's Sarah or Mary. He's pretty good at it. So, so when they're on the raft, things are cozy. They've got their own little world, but they leave the raft and it's danger, right? Well, now the place where you left off reading, he's left the raft, right? He's lost Jim. So spoiler alert for some of you, but that's okay. And he's going up to a cabin. This is where we left it, and they've left the raft. I would like you, as you continue to read this week, I'd like you to just kind of take note of what happens on the raft and what happens off the raft. Like the difference between life on the raft and life not on the raft. Just kind of put those side by side. Okay, let me see if there's anything else. Oh, just because we have a few minutes, I didn't have time to read this yesterday, but I marked this just because it was beautiful. It's just, I love it. There's no lesson. But I love it because we live in the place where it does this. And you've all seen it. Thunderstorm. The thunderstorm that blows through. And the detail with which Mark Twain gives us a Midwestern thunderstorm is fabulous. We spread the blankets inside for a carpet and eat our dinner in there. We put all the other things handy at the back of the cavern. Pretty soon it darkened up and begun to thunder and lighten. So the birds was right about it. Directly it begun to rain, and it rained like all fury, too. And I never see the wind blow so. It was one of these regular summer storms. It gets so dark that it looked all blue-black outside and lovely. And the rain would thrash along by so thick that the trees off a little ways looked dim and spiderwebby. And here would come a blast of wind that would bend the trees down and turn up the pale underside of the leaves. Have you ever seen that? When the leaves flip and just that detail. And then a perfect ripper of a gust would follow along and set the branches to tossing their arms as if they was just wild. And next, when it was just about the bluest and blackest, it was as bright as glory, and you'd have a little glimpse of treetops a-plunging about, away off yonder in the storm, hundreds of yards further than you could see before. Dark as sin again in a second, and now you'd hear the thunder let go with an awful crash and then go rumbling, grumbling, tumbling down the sky towards the underside of the world, like rolling empty barrels downstairs, where it's long stairs and they bounce a good deal, you know. Next time it's storm, this summer, go. And this is a perfect, that blue, black, and the leaves flip over, and okay. I marked a couple of other things that just entertained me because they were humorous. And I wondered if you saw the humor. Okay, here's the stuff they got off the boat, the wrecked boat. We got an old tin lantern and a butcher knife without any handle and a brand new Barlow knife worth 2 bits in any store. and a lot of tallow candles, and a tin candlestick, and a gourd, and a tin cup, and a ratty old bed quilt off the bed, and a reticule with needles and pins and beeswax and buttons and thread and all such truck in it, and a hatchet and some nails and a fish line as thick as my little finger, and some monstrous hooks on it, and a roll of buckskin, and a leather dog collar, and a horseshoe, and some vials of medicine that didn't have no label on them. And just as we was leaving, I found a tolerable good curry comb, and Jim, he found a ratty old fiddle bow and a wooden leg. The straps was broke off of it, but barring that, it was a good enough leg, though it was too long for me and not long enough for Jim, and we couldn't find the other one, though we hunted all around. What's the joke?
It's just a bunch of junk.
Well, yes, but there's a particular joke at the end. Do you know what it is?
You never have 2 wooden legs.
Why would you have 2 wooden legs? Nobody's missing 2 legs. You can't walk on 2 wooden legs. He says it was a good enough leg, but it was too long. It was too long for me and too short for Jim. You don't need a wooden leg. You've got 2 legs. And we couldn't find the other one, although we hunted all around. There isn't one, Huck. Okay, that's hilarious. That's just hilarious. Just a second. More flags. Oh, that's that. Okay, maybe that was. All right, what else we got? No. You guys are so patient. Just wait for Mrs. Ferguson. Okay, I guess that was it. The looking for the extra leg. Okay, all right. Go through the speeches. Mark our. Is it still up there? Yes. Mark the appeals to the various, the different forms of rhetorical appeals. I'm not asking you to write anything, but do mark them. Highlight them, underline them, circle them, write in the margin, and answer the questions about the speeches. Read chapters 17 through 28, and I'll see you next time. Bye, guys.